Mema ko bia iri fi amani kotokungen. Mema ko bia iri fi amani kotokungen. Asante chanti otmo champo fungen. Asante chanti otmo champo fungen. Asante siesiebo smenditien. Asante siesiebo smenditien. Ko bia santinade kasangen. Ko bia santinade kasangen. Satu tori wodi yerisio. Satu tori wodi yerisio. O persona dia sumjeni asumje ba tatmem ni gana menina. Nadia Sumjele in Kabombo Santimani Ghana Menina. Binya Sabian Ko baby. Oh, Binya Sabian Ko baby. Never Bacana Flampo, Demi Ferrisi. Never Bacana Flampo, Demi Ferrisi. Demon Jamaica da Koyadun. Demon Jamaica da Koyadun. Yadania Koboja Jota, touch more champ on Fungen. Yadania Koboja Jota, touch more champ on Fungen. Otasika Saman Ned Jakungen. Otasika Saman Ned Jakungen. Jack Banco de flower, and Jacoba Banco de flower, and a flower flampo, the flower, no flower flampo, the flower. Oh, Saji for good negotiation, oh, Saji for good negotiation. What was that today, Cassangen? What was that today, Cassangen? What could I get about the flower? Good negotiation,
On behalf of my dear wife and children, and on behalf of the chiefs and people of Asanteman, I bring you warm greetings. I'm deeply honored to stand before you at Howard University today, an institution whose history occupies a distinguished place in the intellectual, political, and social advancement of people of African descent. I express my sincere appreciation to the Executive Board of the Millennium Excellence Foundation and to the leadership of Howard University for extending this invitation to me and for creating this opportunity for us to reflect together upon matters that concern not merely Ghana or Africa, but the wider historical family of African peoples across the world. Howard University is more than an institution at which knowledge is transmitted and academic degrees are awarded. It's an institution of memory, intellectual courage, social responsibility, and service. Since its establishment, it has helped generations of men and women of African descent to demonstrate that education is not simply a pathway towards individual advancement, but also a responsibility towards society. Its commitment to truth and service makes this university an especially appropriate place to consider the relationship among governance, cultural preservation, traditional leadership, and the reconstruction of meaningful bonds between Africa and its diaspora. The theme placed before us is profound because it brings together three subjects that are too often considered separately. Governance concerns the organization of power and responsibility. Culture concerns the meaning a people give to their existence. And the diaspora concerns the survival of identity across geography, displacement, and historical rupture. Yet beneath all these three lies one fundamental question. How does a people organize itself, understand itself, and transmit to future generations an inheritance worthy of preservation? My proposition this evening is that traditional leadership, when exercised with integrity, wisdom, accountability, and respect for constitutional government, remains an important part of the answer to that question. Traditional leadership should not be understood merely as an institution inherited from the past, nor should culture be reduced to ceremonial display. Properly understood, both are living resources that can contribute to good governance, social cohesion, peace building, education, development, cultural confidence, and the renewal of relationship between Africa and the peoples of African descent throughout the world. Governance is frequently confused with government. Yet while government refers to the formal institutions of the state, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, ministries, public agencies, and the administrative machinery through which public policy is implemented, governance is wider. It concerns the manner in which authority is acquired, exercised, limited, and transferred, how resources are managed, how disputes are resolved, how leaders are held accountable, how the vulnerable are protected, and how society defines and pursues the common good. A nation may possess an impressive constitution and yet experience poor governance. It may hold regular elections and still fail to provide justice, security, education, healthcare, or meaningful participation for substantial sections of its population. Institutions do not operate in a moral vacuum. They operate within cultures, habits, expectations, and systems of social obligation. Law is indispensable, but law alone cannot create a good society. A constitution may determine what a public official is permitted to do, but culture helps determine what society believes a responsible leader ought to do. A court may punish corruption after the offense has occurred. Still, society must also cultivate the moral conviction that public resources are held in trust and must not be treated as private property. A judicial decision may determine the legal rights of parties to a dispute, but judgment alone does not always restore damaged relationships within families and communities. Governance, therefore, requires more than institutional machinery. It requires legitimacy, trust, moral restraint, memory, and shared expectations, as well as citizens and leaders who understand that rights are inseparable from obligations and that power is inseparable from responsibility. Traditional African political systems understood this relationship between authority and moral obligation in ways that deserve serious academic attention. Leadership was rarely conceived merely as the possession of unrestricted power. The ruler was expected to protect the community, administer justice, preserve the land, defend the vulnerable, and maintain the people's inheritance. Authority was therefore accompanied by responsibility, and that principle remains relevant to our modern world. Power, separated from responsibility, becomes dangerous. Authority, separated from accountability, eventually loses legitimacy. And leadership that seeks privilege without accepting obligation weakens the institution from which that privilege derives. Permit me in this respect to draw upon the Asante constitutional tradition. The Asante political system is sometimes misunderstood by those who encounter only its visible manifestations: the golden stool, the royal umbrellas, the drums, the gold ornaments, the linquets as they stand here, the swords, the procession, and the great ceremonies of state. These symbols are important because they are the visible language through which memory and authority are communicated. But beneath the splendor lies a sophisticated philosophy of political responsibility. A golden stool is not the private property of the Asantehene. It represents the unity, identity, historical continuity, and collective spirit of Asanteman. The Asantehene is therefore not the owner of the nation, but its custodian, and that distinction is fundamental. The occupant of the golden stool receives an inheritance that existed before him, and which must endure after him. He holds authority temporarily, but he holds the people's heritage in trust. The land, institutions, memories, and moral obligations associated with the stool cannot legitimately be reduced to the personal interest of the individual who occupies it.
Sure.
Because from this perspective, leadership is a form of trusteeship. The idea of trusteeship contains an important lesson for all systems of governance. We hold office temporarily. We inherit institutions from those who came before us. And although we exercise authority in the present, our decisions affect people who are not yet born. The leader who consumes everything for the advantage of the present generation has misunderstood the nature of stewardship. This principle has particular urgency in an age of environmental degradation, uncontrolled exploitation of natural resources, and political decision-making dominated by short-term considerations. We did not create the rivers, forests, land, and ecological systems that sustain us. We inherited them. And whatever our authority may be today, we have no moral right to destroy the inheritance of generations unborn.
Sure.
Traditional governments also reminds us.
Sure.
Traditional governance also reminds us that legitimate authority requires consultation. Our people say, "Tikron kwejina," meaning that one head does not constitute a council.
Yeah.
And we also say, "Nyansen ni nipa baako chirim," meaning that wisdom does not reside in the head of one person alone.
Sure.
These are not merely attractive proverbs, they communicate a political philosophy. The Asante exercises authority through an established order of chiefs, queen mothers, elders, linguists, and recognized customary officers. Matters are considered, evidence may be heard, historical precedent may be recalled. Different perspectives may be presented, and decisions are shaped by consultation and concern for communal harmony. Consultation does not mean that leadership has no authority, nor does listening diminish the dignity of the leader. The leader who refuses to hear contrary opinion eventually becomes imprisoned by those who tell him only what he wishes to hear. Responsible leadership must therefore create room for difficult truth. The modern world sometimes equates decisiveness with refusing consultation. But our ancestors understood differently. They knew that the strength of a decision may depend upon the quality of deliberation that precedes it. This does not mean that traditional institutions should be romanticized, because no institution, traditional, political, religious, or academic, is beyond criticism or reform. And antiquity alone does not confer moral perfection. Traditional authority must justify its continuing relevance through service. A chief who is concerned only with ceremony, privileges, titles, and public honor gradually diminishes the institution he represents. At the same time, a traditional ruler who listens to his people, protects community resources, promotes education, mediates conflict, assists the vulnerable, and responds to contemporary challenges strengthens both tradition and society. Traditional leadership in the 21st century cannot therefore be limited to festivals and ceremonial occasions. It must be capable of responding to educational inequality, unemployment, environmental degradation, land disputes, public health emergencies, community conflict, and the anxieties of young people. The palace must remain a guardian of memory, but it must also become a workshop for the future. This requires traditional institutions themselves to accept reform, because tradition must never become a shield behind which injustice, corruption, exploitation, or arbitrary authority are protected. The dignity of women and children must be defended. Young people must be heard. Persons with disabilities must not be marginalized. Community resources must be managed responsibly. Land administration must be transparent, and succession and customary processes must be conducted with integrity. The proper defense of tradition is therefore not an insistence that nothing should ever change, but the